The department store on Westfield Avenue in suburban Fairview, Connecticut was the kind of place that smelled like money and soft lighting. Not real money. The kind that had been earned and saved and worried over. The kind that came in gift cards and community fund donations and coupons clipped from newsletters that nobody rich ever read. The kind that arrived folded twice inside a plain white envelope handed across a guidance counselor's desk on a Thursday afternoon, along with a quiet suggestion that maybe just this once she should buy something new. It was a Saturday in late May. The store's main floor shimmered with the particular softness that retail designers spend considerable effort achieving. Warmth without heat, light without harshness. The pleasant illusion that every person browsing the racks belonged there equally. Prom dresses lined one wall in silk and tulle and sequin. Graduation gifts filled a table near the entrance. A woman in her 50s was debating pearl earrings at the jewelry counter, with the unhurried certainty of someone who had never once had to check a price tag twice. Near the dress displays, moving quietly and with deliberate calm, was a 17-year-old black girl in a plain navy jacket. She carried a tote bag on her left shoulder. She held a folded piece of paper in her right hand, a coupon, the kind that required a manager code and a specific purchase minimum to activate. She had received it from her guidance counselor, Mrs. Aditi Patel, 3 days earlier. She was looking at a specific dress. Navy blue, mid-length, modest, and cut the kind of thing that would photograph well under ceremony lighting without looking like she was trying to be someone she was not. She had a specific occasion in mind, and a specific amount saved from 3 months of tutoring sessions, and she had planned this purchase the way she planned everything, carefully, completely, with enough margin built in that nothing would go wrong. Her name was Aaliyah Grant, and before this afternoon ended, Officer Kevin Dorsey would make the worst professional decision of his career. He would do it in front of a room full of witnesses. He would do it in front of a camera he did not know was running. He would do it to the one person in that store whose name he was least equipped to have on his record. He did not know any of that yet. He was watching her from across the floor. And he had already made his decision. Aaliyah Grant had learned somewhere around age 12 that the world would form opinions about her before she opened her mouth. She had learned it in grocery stores and library parking lots and school hallways and the waiting rooms of offices where adults made decisions about her future. She had learned it not from a single defining moment, but from the accumulation of small moments. The store clerk who appeared beside her the instant she touched something on a display rack. The neighbor who called her polite in the tone usually reserved for unexpected things. The substitute teacher who had looked at her test score and asked whether she was sure she had not guessed. She had responded to this education the way she responded to most challenges, by becoming exceptional. Not because excellence would eliminate the suspicion. She had learned that too the hard way. But because it was the only investment she had full control over. She could not control what people decided about her when they saw her walk into a room. She could not control the assumptions that preceded her. She could control the argument she made in that room once she got there. She had decided at 12 to make the strongest possible argument, and she had not stopped making it since. Every hour she spent tutoring 8th graders in algebra after school was an hour she was building something no one could search. Every debate tournament she prepared for until midnight was preparation for a world that would ask her to justify herself, and would respond better if she did so with precision and composure and the specific unhurried confidence of someone who knows their material. She had learned to disagree with opponents during tournaments in a way that made the opponent feel respected, while simultaneously dismantling every premise they had built their argument on. She had learned this because the alternative emotion, agitation, visible frustration cost points with the judges, and she was in the business of winning. She was also in the business of surviving, which in her experience required many of the same skills. She was the captain of the Fairview High debate team, 2 years running. She was the valedictorian of her graduating class, a fact she carried quietly rather than loudly because she understood that announcing excellence was a different activity from demonstrating it. She tutored 12 students ranging from 6th to 10th grade at a rate that provided real supplemental income to a family that needed it. She cared for her younger brother Marcus from 3:30 to 6:30 every weekday, while their mother was finishing her first shift. Their mother, Diane Grant, was a home health aide who worked double shifts 3 days a week and single shifts on the other 2. She was 41 years old. She had the specific kind of tiredness that does not show on the face because showing it is a luxury not available to women who are also the entire support structure of a household. She had raised Aaliyah on the principle that the world owed you nothing, and that this was not a reason to stop expecting it to be better. She had told Aaliyah on the night the scholarship letter arrived after they had both cried at the kitchen table for about 20 minutes, and Marcus had come in from his room wondering what was happening and had been told, and had cried too. You did not do this for them. You did this for you. Remember that every time someone acts surprised. The folded envelope in Aaliyah's tote bag was not the coupon. The coupon was in her hand. The envelope was something else, something with a gold seal on the flap. Something she had been carrying for 8 days because she was not yet ready to stop having it close to her. She had opened it in her bedroom at the desk where she did her homework, sat with it for a long time, and then called Mrs. Patel at 7 in the evening on a Thursday and said, "I need to tell you something." She had not been able to finish the sentence for almost a full minute. The tote bag contained 2 textbooks, one for AP Chemistry and one for AP Literature, a graphing calculator with her initials written in marker on the back case, a cloth pouch containing 3 debate medals, 2 from regional tournaments, 1 from state, a notebook with color-coded tabs, and the envelope. The viewer does not yet know what is inside the envelope. That information will arrive at the worst possible moment for a man who will have spent the previous 30 minutes proving he cannot tell the difference between suspicion and evidence. Aaliyah had noticed the sales associate, a woman whose name tag read Janet, tracking her movements since approximately 2 minutes after she entered the store. She knew the quality of that attention because it had a specific texture, the way Janet kept repositioning herself near whichever rack Aaliyah was browsing, the way she straightened items that did not need straightening while keeping her eyes on the tote bag rather than the merchandise. Aaliyah had felt that particular texture many times. She knew what it predicted. She squared her shoulders. She adjusted the tote strap. She kept browsing because she had a right to browse and because she had learned that leaving solved nothing and staying sometimes produced data that turned out to be useful later. She found the navy dress. She held it up against the light and looked at the price tag, which was within her range with the gift card applied. She was calculating when Janet made the call. Aaliyah did not hear the call. She did not need to. She saw Janet pick up the store phone at the service desk, keep her eyes on Aaliyah while she spoke quietly, and hang up within 30 seconds. She knew what call had been made. She put the dress back on the rack, turned to face the room, and waited. Officer Kevin Dorsey was 43 years old, 12 years on the Fairview Police Department, and 4 years into the off-duty retail security contract that paid him $22 an hour to walk the floor of Westfield Luxury Goods. He was good at making affluent shoppers feel safe. He had developed the approach over years, not through training, but through the accumulated reinforcement of doing it repeatedly without consequence. The specific technique involved projecting visible authority toward anyone who made the affluent shoppers nervous, which in his experience of this particular store was a very consistent demographic. He had generated 9 formal complaints in 4 years. He was aware of this number. He was also aware that none of the 9 had produced any formal consequence for him, which he interpreted not as evidence that the complaints had been found baseless, but as evidence that the system had evaluated them correctly. The complaints came from black teenagers primarily, from 2 Latino delivery workers who had been questioned near the store's rear loading entrance, from one older Indian man who had simply been returning a watch under warranty and had been followed from the customer service desk to the parking lot. All 9 had been processed through the store's security contractor who sent them to Lieutenant Frank Riley at the Fairview Police Department's off-duty employment coordination office. Riley was an administrative man, which is a different kind of problem. He understood that the off-duty employment program generated approximately $400,000 annually in supplemental income for officers in his division, that this income was valued, and that the program's continuation depended on maintaining good relationships with the corporate clients who contracted for the service. Complaints created friction. Friction created risk. His job was to manage the friction. He managed it by routing retail security complaints to a secondary database separate from the main internal affairs intake system where they could be resolved by his own determination, rather than by the formal review process. His determination in each of the 9 cases was the same. The officer had exercised reasonable security judgment. The complainants received a form letter. Riley kept a copy. The case was closed. The first complainant, a 16-year-old girl named Tanya Morrison, who had been searched near the jewelry counter 2 years earlier, had called the department twice after receiving the letter. She had spoken to a coordinator the first time and left a message the second. No callback came. 3 of the 9 complainants were from families who did not have the time or resources to escalate beyond the initial complaint. 2 did not speak English as a first language. One was a 15-year-old whose parents had decided that pursuing the complaint would require their son to relive the experience in front of additional strangers in additional institutional settings, and that the cost of that was more than they were willing to ask him to pay. This was the architecture that had kept Dorsey employed and unaccountable for 4 years. Not a dramatic cover-up, not a conspiracy, just a structure. A set of procedures and routing decisions and administrative categories that made accountability expensive and difficult and ultimately optional for the people seeking it. Dorsey had kept a small notebook for 4 years. It showed 17 names in the past 4 months. 15 were Black or Latino. None had resulted in confirmed theft. He had never thought of this as a pattern. He thought of it as instinct. He crossed the floor when Janet's call came in. He had seen Aaliyah the moment she walked through the entrance and had already formed his view before she touched a single item on a rack. The call from Janet was not what prompted his decision. It was confirmation of a decision he had made 30 seconds after she walked in. He walked toward her with the specific, unhurried confidence of a man who has done this many times and has never once faced a consequence for it. 2 other people were relevant to what was about to happen, and neither of them was inside the store yet. The first was Mrs. Aditi Patel, Aaliyah's guidance counselor for 3 years. She had arranged a community feature with the store 6 weeks earlier, had spent the subsequent weeks coordinating with the store's marketing manager, had personally selected the reporter she trusted to tell the story with care, and had arrived at Westfield Luxury Goods at 1:45 in the afternoon with a folder of background materials. A confirmation email from Carol Whitman, the store's general manager, and the quiet pride of a woman whose student was about to be publicly celebrated for something she had earned entirely on her own. She was in the parking lot when her phone buzzed. The second was Dana Reyes, the reporter 38 years old who covered the education and community beat for the Fairview Courier. Dana had a camera operator with her, a man named Greg, who carried a shoulder-mounted camera and had the professional instinct to press record the moment a situation stopped feeling routine. They were in the parking lot when Mrs. Patel's phone buzzed. They were 15 minutes from the moment their presence would change everything. One last detail planted here and noted in passing. 6 months earlier, following a series of vandalism incidents near the store's rear service area, Carol Whitman had approved the installation of an internal security camera system with continuous recording capability. The cameras covered the main floor, the fitting room corridor, and the 2 primary display areas. The footage uploaded to a cloud server every 15 minutes. It was retained for 60 days. Nobody had told Dorsey about the new cameras. Nobody had thought to. Dorsey arrived in front of Aaliyah with the specific choreography of someone who has rehearsed authority through repetition rather than training. Feet wide, shoulders back, thumbs hooked near his belt in the casual proximity of a weapon he was not holding but wanted you to be aware of. He told her to step aside. She asked why. He said there had been a report of missing jewelry. Aaliyah had not been near the jewelry counter. She said so. She kept her voice at the flat, precise register she used in debate when she wanted the judge to understand that she was stating a fact rather than making an argument. She offered her deposit receipt for the dress, a paper receipt that demonstrated both that she had been in the store before and that she had come with a specific and legitimate purpose. Dorsey looked at the receipt. He looked at the tote bag. He said he needed to search the bag. Aaliyah said she would not consent to a search without a manager present, and that since she was a minor, she wanted her mother or a school representative present before any search occurred. Dorsey wrote something in his small notebook. He said that refusing a search was suspicious behavior in a loss prevention context. Aaliyah looked at the notebook. She memorized the time on the wall clock behind him. 1:52 in the afternoon. Nearby, a store employee named Marcus had stopped folding a sweater and was standing very still. He was 24 years old and had been working at the store for 8 months. He was watching Dorsey and Aaliyah with the expression of someone who recognizes a situation they have been in and does not know how to intervene in someone else's version of it. 2 shoppers had slowed near the adjacent rack. An older woman with a large shopping bag had stopped completely and was watching with open curiosity. Aaliyah felt the weight of being watched and performed the discipline she had spent years building. Voice calm, no tears, no anger, hands visible at all times. She asked whether she was being detained. Dorsey said she was being held for verification purposes. She asked what the legal basis for that was on private property. He said he was authorized to request customer cooperation in a loss prevention context. She said she was cooperating by providing her receipt and by waiting here, and that she would continue cooperating until a manager arrived and that she was asking for a manager now. He said the manager had been notified. She asked to call her mother. He said she could make any call she needed to after the situation was resolved. She noted aloud at a volume that carried several feet in both directions that this was not an answer to her question. Dorsey wrote something else in his notebook. Aaliyah looked at the store's front windows. Through them at the far edge of the parking lot, she could see a car she did not recognize pulling in. A woman was getting out. Another person carrying something large on their shoulder was getting out of the passenger side. She could not tell what the large thing was from this distance. She looked back at Dorsey and kept her face composed. She glanced once, only once, at her tote bag. Not with fear. With something more specific. The protectiveness of someone who has carried something important for a long time and does not want it touched by hands that do not understand what it is. Dorsey told Aaliyah after approximately 4 minutes that she had 2 options. She could empty the tote voluntarily right here, right now, and the situation would be resolved based on what was or was not found. Or she could decline, and he would request that she be held in the store's security processing area while a formal loss prevention report was filed. He said the second option would involve a city officer being called in, a formal record, a longer afternoon. The threat had no precise legal foundation. On private property, the mechanism he was describing was essentially the store's right to request customer cooperation or to ask an uncooperative customer to leave. Neither constituted the detention he was implying. But it sounded institutional. It sounded like there was a system behind it, and systems, when invoked by people wearing the physical markers of authority, produce compliance from people who are too frightened or too young or too unfamiliar with the specifics of law to know exactly where the bluff ends. Aaliyah was not too frightened. She was not naive. But she was 17 and she was alone, and there was a room of people watching, and the specific exhaustion of standing in this position where every word she said could be reframed as obstruction, where composure could be recategorized as arrogance, where knowledge of her rights could be presented as evidence of guilt, was the kind of exhaustion that does not show on the face but accumulates in the chest like pressure. She stated clearly at a volume the nearby shoppers could hear that she had not consented to a search, that she was a minor, that she wanted a manager and her school guidance counselor present, and that she was asking for both now. Dorsey logged this in his notebook. He told her that the posture she was displaying was exactly what people with something to conceal typically displayed. A second store employee had appeared behind Dorsey, standing at a distance that was not quite far enough to be uninvolved and not quite close enough to constitute support. The semicircle of watching shoppers had expanded. A woman near the fitting room corridor had her phone at her side, not raised but present. Aaliyah stood where she was and did not move. Dorsey reached for the tote bag. Aaliyah said clearly and immediately that she had not given consent and was restating this for the record. He did not stop. He lifted the tote from her shoulder. She did not resist physically because she understood what resistance would look like and what it would be used to justify. He carried the bag to the nearest glass display surface, an empty jewelry case, and set it down. He began removing items one at a time. The AP chemistry textbook came out first. 540 pages annotated in 3 colors. Blue for definitions, green for equations, orange for concepts she found genuinely interesting, which was most of them. The book landed on the glass with a flat, solid weight. Pages splayed open to chapter 14. The annotations were visible to anyone close enough to see them. The AP literature book followed. A used copy, its spine cracked from heavy use post-it notes flagging 32 pages. It slid slightly on the glass before stopping near the edge open pages, resting against the display case's metal frame. The graphing calculator came out and slid. It scraped across the full width of the display case before Dorsey stopped it with his hand near the far edge. He turned it over, looked at the back, set it down, face up. The initials in marker were visible. D.G. Written by a woman who had been on a double shift when she wrote them, who had found the marker in her work bag during a lunch break because she did not want her daughter's calculator confused with anyone else's at school. Dorsey did not ask about the initials. The notebook came out. Color-coded tabs, 50 pages of notes in Aaliyah's tight economical handwriting. The handwriting of someone who had learned to maximize page space because notebooks cost money and margins were not decorative. He flipped through the first few pages. He set it down. Then the cloth pouch. It hit the glass with the sound that carries. The specific clink of 3 debate medals shifting inside their protective cloth. Muffled by the fabric, but present. A sound with a particular weight and precision that cut through the ambient store noise with the clarity of something that does not belong in the context of a loss prevention search. Several heads turned toward the sound. The woman near the fitting room corridor raised her phone. Not dramatically. She just raised it and held it level, which was sufficient. Dorsey looked at the pouch. He did not open it. He set it aside. Then the folded envelope. It was folded once horizontally to fit alongside the textbooks. The front of the envelope with the name and address and the gold seal on the lower left corner was facing down when it fell. The university's name was facing the glass. Aaliyah saw it fall and said in a voice that was completely controlled and completely clear, "Please do not bend that." The please was real. It was not a courtesy reflex. It was genuine. A genuine request from someone who had been carrying this particular document carefully for 8 days, who had put it in the cloth section of the tote rather than the main compartment where it might get bent, who understood that the creasing of a document is irreversible. Dorsey picked it up. He held it for a moment. He looked at the blank back, and set it aside face down near his right hand on the glass case. He ran his hand along the interior lining of the tote. He checked the small interior pocket, which contained 1 lip balm and a single earring, back the small, clear rubber kind that comes off constantly and ends up at the bottom of every bag every woman has ever owned. He turned the bag upside down and shook it gently. A crumb, a paper corner, a grocery store reward card she had forgotten about. He set the bag down. He looked at the display surface. 2 textbooks open, 1 graphing calculator, 1 cloth pouch with its metallic contents, 1 notebook, 1 receipt, the deposit receipt she had offered him 7 minutes earlier that would have resolved this before it began, 1 lip balm, 1 earring back, 1 grocery reward card, 1 folded envelope face down, no jewelry, no missing merchandise, nothing that had not come from the tote bag that had come from Aaliyah's shoulder when she walked through the entrance with a coupon in her hand. The room had gone very quiet, not the silence of an absence of sound, the silence of people who are collectively aware that something significant is happening, and who were holding themselves still in order to observe it. The ambient music continued. The ventilation hummed, but the human sounds had stopped. Aaliyah was looking at the envelope. She was holding herself very still in the specific way that people hold themselves when they are managing something that, if allowed to move, would be very large. She had been managing it for 27 minutes. The management was requiring effort that was not visible on her face. It was visible in the particular quality of her stillness. Dorsey paused. He looked at the display surface with the expression of a man whose framework has arrived at a result that the framework cannot acknowledge as a result, because the framework's job is not to reach conclusions, but to sustain suspicion. He said that she may have passed items to someone else before he arrived. He said that the absence of merchandise on her person did not eliminate the possibility of her involvement. Aaliyah looked at him. "There is nothing on this table that I did not bring into this store." He opened his notebook. He began writing. She watched the pen move. She was memorizing. The time on the clock behind him, 2:04 in the afternoon, the contents of the display surface, the number of people watching, the name on his security badge. She was building the record she might need later the way she built everything, carefully, in advance of needing it. Dorsey called the situation into the store's loss prevention system on the radio at his belt. He gave Aaliyah's name and logged the interaction as an active person of interest report in a potential jewelry theft. This was the moment that mattered most and was least visible. The log created a formal entry in the store's security database, connected to a regional loss prevention network shared by 14 retail chains in the Connecticut and New York metro area. The entry would be accessible to any loss prevention officer at any affiliated store who ran a search. It would appear as a flag. It would say, "Person of interest, jewelry theft, Westfield, luxury goods, Fairview, CT May." It would not say, "Nothing was found." It would not say the individual provided a valid receipt, offered to wait for a manager, and refused consent, in full accordance with her rights. It would just say, "Flag." Dorsey knew this. He had created this kind of record before. He understood that it persisted beyond the afternoon, beyond the store, beyond any conversation that could be had in the moment. It was the kind of record that appeared in background checks, in hiring processes, in security clearance applications. He believed this was appropriate. Janet Cole, the associate who had made the initial call, was standing 15 feet away. She had watched the entire search. She had not at any point confirmed that she had actually seen Aaliyah take anything. She had not been asked by Dorsey whether she had seen a specific act. She said nothing. Through the store's front windows, the car that had arrived in the far parking lot was now closer. A woman was walking toward the entrance. Behind her, someone was carrying what was unmistakably a camera. Aaliyah could see this. She looked at it for a moment. She looked back at Dorsey, who had his back to the window. She did not say anything about the people approaching the entrance. She waited. Mrs. Patel entered the store at 2:11 in the afternoon. She had been in the parking lot when she received a text from Marcus, the store employee, who had typed it out with the careful, slightly breathless phrasing of someone who understood that specificity might matter later. It said, "Your student is here, and there is a situation. Security. She has been searched. Nothing found. Still here." Mrs. Patel had read the text, looked up at Dana Reyes, and said, "We need to go in now." Dana had nodded to Greg. Greg had shouldered the camera. Mrs. Patel entered first, walking with the specific directional speed of a woman who has spent 20 years navigating institutional situations on behalf of young people who deserved better than they were getting. She saw Aaliyah immediately, standing beside the empty jewelry display case, her belongings spread across the glass surface. Dorsey beside her with his notebook, the textbooks, the calculator, the cloth pouch, the folded envelope still lying face down. Mrs. Patel walked directly to Aaliyah's side. Dorsey told her this was an active security situation and asked her to wait. Mrs. Patel said she was Aaliyah Grant's school guidance counselor, that she had a scheduled appointment at this store, and that she was asking what had been found. Dorsey said the investigation was ongoing. Mrs. Patel said what was found. A pause. He said nothing confirmed at this time. She asked whether any stolen merchandise had been found on or near this student. Another pause. He said nothing confirmed at this time. Mrs. Patel looked at the display surface. She looked at Aaliyah. She asked quietly and directly whether she was all right. Aaliyah said yes. Her voice was steady. Her eyes were not wet, not yet, though the specific pressure in her chest had reached the point where the yes was coming from a place that required effort. Dana Reyes had stopped 6 feet inside the entrance. Greg had the camera on his shoulder and was reading the room with the professional assessment of someone deciding whether to raise the lens. Dana stepped toward Aaliyah specifically and said quietly enough that it was a private conversation. "We are here to cover your scholarship. I need to know whether you want us to document what is happening right now. You do not have to. But if you want us to, we will." Aaliyah looked at the items on the display surface. She looked at the folded envelope still face down. She looked at the debate medals still in their cloth pouch. She looked at the graphing calculator with her mother's handwriting on the case. She said, "Yes, because this is also part of the story." Greg raised the camera. Dorsey saw the camera go up and turned toward the entrance with the expression of someone who has just recalculated several things simultaneously. Mrs. Patel moved to the display surface. She picked up the folded envelope. She held it for a moment, feeling its weight, which was the weight of a single folded piece of paper, and she turned it over. She read the return address on the front. She looked at Dorsey. She looked at the camera. She looked back at Dorsey, and the expression on her face was not anger. It was something more precise than anger. Something that came from 20 years of watching students like Aaliyah be underestimated in rooms like this one. She placed the envelope in Aaliyah's hands. Carol Whitman, the store's general manager, arrived at 2:14. She had come down when she realized that the name on the security log was the same name in the community feature confirmation she had approved 6 weeks earlier. The same name on the gift card donation letter signed by her own signature. The same name she had been expecting to walk in today as the subject of a positive news segment. She asked Dorsey what had been recovered. He said nothing confirmed. She asked what was currently on the display surface. He looked at the textbooks, the calculator, the medals, the notebook, the envelope in Aaliyah's hands, the earring back the lip balm. He said these were items removed from the subject's bag during a consent to search procedure. Carol said, "She consented to this search." A pause. Dorsey said the situation had required voluntary compliance. Carol looked at Mrs. Patel. Mrs. Patel said Aaliyah had explicitly and repeatedly not consented to the search, had asked for a manager 3 times, and had requested to call her mother. Carol looked at the camera. The red recording light was on. She looked at Janet Cole and asked her directly whether she had observed Aaliyah remove any merchandise from a display. Janet said no. "I did not actually see her take anything. She was just browsing for a long time without buying." The room was very quiet. Aaliyah's mother arrived at 2:17. She had received the text from Mrs. Patel at 2:08 while on her break at the end of her first shift, and she had left immediately, still in her scrubs. The light blue uniform of someone whose workday involves other people's most vulnerable moments. Because that was the kind of mother Diane Grant was, the kind who left immediately. She came through the entrance and saw the scene. She saw her daughter standing beside a glass display surface with her belongings spread across it. She saw the 2 textbooks lying open. She saw the calculator with the initials she had written in marker. She saw the cloth pouch with the medals. She saw the notebook. She saw the folded envelope in Aaliyah's hands. She saw Dorsey with his notebook. She did not run. She walked. Directly. With the specific gravitational weight of a mother who has arrived at the scene of something that should never have happened, and who has decided in the 10 steps between the entrance and the display case exactly what she is going to do about it. She went to the display surface first. She picked up the AP chemistry textbook and closed it carefully, smoothing the pages that had been bent open. She placed it in the tote bag. She picked up the AP literature book and did the same. She picked up the graphing calculator and looked at it for a moment at the marker letters on the case DG for Diane Grant, written in the same handwriting she used on birthday cards and permission slips, and the notes she left on the kitchen table in the morning before Aaliyah woke up. She placed it in the bag. She picked up the cloth pouch with the medals and held it for a moment, feeling the weight of the 3 medals through the cloth. She placed it in the bag. She picked up the notebook. Then she straightened. She turned to face Dorsey holding the notebook against her chest, and she looked at him with the expression of a woman who has worked double shifts for 11 years, who has been tired in ways that do not get described, because the people who earn that kind of tired do not have time to describe it. Who has sat up with her daughter at 2 in the morning reading scholarship essay drafts and told her the truth about every sentence, and then gone to work at 6 and come home and done it again. Who has calculated budgets on envelopes and applied for every assistance program that existed and worked extra shifts to cover what the programs did not. Who has done all of this without complaint and without audience, because complaint requires energy she has always needed for something else. She said, "My daughter wrote a speech. She worked on it for 3 weeks. Those are the pages in that envelope. She was carrying it because she wanted to know it was safe." She paused. "You picked it up and put it face down on a glass case. You logged her name in a database as a theft suspect. You searched her belongings in front of a store full of people and found nothing because there was nothing to find." She looked at him directly. "Every page you put on that surface represents a night she stayed up after I went to bed. Every one of those medals represents a room full of people who came to watch her, not to watch her be searched. She did not shout. She did not need to." She looked at the camera. She looked at Carol Whitman. She looked back at Dorsey. "I need her name removed from whatever record you just created, and I need to know what you are going to do to make sure this does not happen to the next child who walks in here with a tote bag and a coupon." Dorsey closed his notebook. He did not answer. Mrs. Patel asked Aaliyah whether she would read what the envelope said. The room was very still. The shoppers who had gathered, the store employees, Carol Whitman, Janet Cole, Dorsey, the camera, the woman with the phone she had raised. All of them still. Aaliyah looked at the envelope in her hands. She had been carrying it for 8 days. She had opened it in her bedroom at the desk where she did her homework and had read it 3 times before she believed it. She had called Mrs. Patel at 7 in the evening on a Thursday and said, "I need to tell you something," and had not been able to finish the sentence for almost a minute. She unfolded it now. In the middle of the Westfield Luxury Goods main floor, with the prom dresses shimmering under their soft lights and the graduation gifts on the table near the entrance, and the woman who had just been searching her belongings standing 4 feet away. She held it level so the gold seal was visible to the room. She read aloud the opening line. "Dear Ms. Grant, it is our great pleasure to inform you that you have been selected to receive a full-need scholarship to Harvard University covering tuition, room and board and educational fees for the duration of your undergraduate enrollment." She read it clearly, at the same volume she used in debate when she wanted every judge in the room to hear exactly what she was saying without ambiguity or repetition. The room held the words for a moment. Then Dana Reyes looked at Dorsey and asked, "What did you find in her bag, officer?" Dorsey said, "Nothing." She said, "Did you see this letter before you set it face down on the display case?" He said, "I did not look at it closely." She said, "It was in her bag. You removed it. You held it and set it aside." He did not answer. Mrs. Patel stood beside Aaliyah and said at a volume the camera would capture clearly, "Aaliyah Grant is the valedictorian of her graduating class at Fairview High School. She has captained the debate team for 2 years and won 3 medals at regional and state tournaments. She has tutored 12 students in the community over the past 3 years. She has maintained a 4.0 GPA across 4 years of coursework that included 7 advanced placement courses. She is the first student from the Fairview district in 11 years to receive a full-need scholarship to an Ivy League university. She walked into this store with a coupon and a deposit receipt to buy a dress for her scholarship ceremony. She walked into this store as the subject of a planned community feature that this establishment agreed to host. She looked at Dorsey. and she spent 25 minutes being treated as a suspect. Diane Grant moved to stand beside her daughter. She said, "What is on that notepad?" Dorsey said it was his log. She said, "My daughter's name is in that log as a theft suspect." He said it was standard procedure. Diane said, "There was no theft. There was a black teenager in a dress section with a tote bag and a coupon. That is not a theft. That is a Saturday." She held her daughter's hand. Aaliyah's fingers closed around hers. Diane continued. "That letter in her hands. She earned that. She earned it at the kitchen table at 2 in the morning while I was asleep, because I had a 6 o'clock shift and she did not want to wake me. She earned it at debate tournaments where I could not always come because I had a shift. She earned it tutoring other people's children for $7 an hour and saving the money to buy a dress that she should not have had to justify to anyone in this building." She paused. "She worked for 4 years, so she could walk into a room like this and feel like she belonged there. And in 25 minutes, you did your best to take that from her." She looked at him without flinching. "You will not take it from her." Carol Whitman terminated Dorsey's off-duty security contract at 2:31 in the afternoon. She did it on the sales floor, not in her office, not in a back room. On the floor where the search had happened at the glass display case that was still slightly smeared from the items that had been laid across it in front of the assembled shoppers and employees and the camera that was still recording. She said, "Your contract with this store is terminated effective immediately. Please surrender your store security credential and exit the premises." Dorsey said nothing. He removed the laminated store security badge from his belt and placed it on the display case. He picked up his notebook. He walked toward the exit. He did not look at Aaliyah. He did not look at the camera. He walked through the entrance doors. The woman with the phone, who had been recording on her own since the debate medals made their sound on the glass, lowered her phone. She had 47 seconds of clear, steady footage. Carol Whitman turned to Mrs. Patel and said she wanted to discuss the security log. Mrs. Patel said she was requesting that the entry be suspended immediately pending review and that Aaliyah's name not be accessible in the regional network database until the situation was formally adjudicated. Carol said she would make the call to the contractor before she did anything else. Dana Reyes said she was going to need a statement from the store for the segment. Carol said she would provide one. Dana said the segment was going to include both the scholarship coverage and a full account of what had occurred. Carol said she understood. The footage that Greg had been recording, 31 minutes of clear, stabilized, continuous video, was the definitive record of the afternoon. It captured the moment Dorsey began removing items from the bag. It captured the sound of the debate medals. It captured the envelope being set face down. It captured Diane Grant gathering the textbooks one by one from the display surface. It captured Aaliyah reading the opening line of the Harvard letter. The segment aired that evening. By the following morning, the story had moved beyond local. Lieutenant Frank Riley received the footage and a formal request from the city's Internal Affairs Unit to reopen the 9 prior complaint files. The 9 complaints were no longer 9 separate incidents in a low-priority database. They were a documented pattern of behavior by an officer who had been protected from accountability for 4 years by a procedural structure that was not designed to find the truth. The structural review that followed would take several months. Its conclusions, when they arrived, would not be comfortable reading for the department's off-duty employment coordination office. 2 days later, Aaliyah almost did not go. Not because she was ashamed. She had thought about this carefully, the way she thought about everything carefully, and she had decided that shame was not hers to carry. But the video had spread beyond what she had expected, and there was something disorienting about being seen so widely. For a moment, she had not chosen, and she was 17 years old. Being 17 and watched by the internet simultaneously is its own particular weight. Her mother sat on the edge of Aaliyah's bed at 8 in the morning, 2 hours before they needed to leave, and said, "You are going." Aaliyah said, "I know." Her mother said, "The shame belongs to the adults who created it. Every bit of it. None of it is yours." Aaliyah said, "I know that too." Her mother said, then put on the dress. The dress was navy blue. It had not come from the store. They had driven to a different store the morning after the incident, a smaller shop in a neighboring town run by a woman named Barbara, who was 60 years old and had the specific kindness of someone who pays attention. Aaliyah had found a navy dress in the right size on the third rack. It cost $43 more than she had budgeted. Her mother had paid the difference. The scholarship ceremony was held at the Fairview Community Center on a Monday evening. The room held approximately 200 people: students, parents, teachers, school administrators, 2 local news cameras, several community members who had come because they wanted to be present for something that felt important. Dorsey was at the back of the room. He had been sent by the department as an observer during the period of his administrative review. He stood near the rear exit in civilian clothes. He stood there for the entire ceremony. He could not leave without the departure being noted. Aaliyah was introduced as the school's valedictorian debate champion community tutor and the recipient of the first full-need Ivy League scholarship from the Fairview district in 11 years. The room applauded. Several people stood during the applause. Aaliyah's mother, seated in the front row, smiled the specific smile of someone who is holding something too large for their face to fully express. Aaliyah walked to the podium. She was carrying the scholarship speech in her hands. She had not rewritten it. She had not reprinted it. She was holding the original pages, the ones that had been on the glass display surface, the ones her mother had gathered from the case, and they still had the specific quality of paper that has been handled and refolded several times. The audience could see if they looked closely that the pages were not fresh from a printer. She did not speak from memory. She read from the pages. She said, "I want to tell you something that was not in the first version of this speech. The first version was about what I am going to study and what I hope to contribute, and what the people who supported me have meant to me. All of that is still true, and I will get to it. But 2 days ago something happened that I think belongs in this room." She described what had occurred on Saturday afternoon. She described it precisely and without embellishment the way she had been trained by 4 years of debate to present an account that could withstand examination. She described the tote bag and its contents. She described the search. She described the envelope being set face down on a glass case. She described saying, "Please do not bend that." She said, "The worst part was not being searched. The worst part was understanding while it was happening that no version of who I am would have been sufficient to prevent it. Not the receipt, not the access card, not my guidance counselor's name, not my school ID, not my composure. The decision had been made before I touched a single item in that store. I was suspicious before I was human." She paused. "I want to say something to the younger students in this room, particularly to the ones who look like me. Your excellence is real. It belongs to you. No one can take it from you by doubting it. But your dignity, your right to be in a room, in a store, in a school, on a street, does not require your excellence as proof of concept. You deserve respect because you are a person. That is the only credential that should ever be required." She looked down at the pages. "These are the pages that were on the display case. I am reading from them because they belong here in this room, and not on a glass case in a store where someone decided my bag was more interesting than my receipt." Near the middle of the room, a girl who appeared to be about 14 years old stood up. She was holding a handwritten sign on a piece of cardboard that read, "We believe you." She had made it herself the night before with a marker and the back of a cereal box. A boy beside her stood up with a sign that read, "You belong." Then another girl a row back. Then 2 more students from different parts of the room rising in the specific unorchestrated way that genuine things happen. Not choreographed, not prompted, just felt and acted on. Aaliyah's mother in the front row had been composed for 48 hours. She was not composed anymore. She pressed both hands over her mouth and looked at her daughter at the podium and cried. Not quietly, not the restrained variety, with the full weight of 2 days of holding it together, of scrubs and kitchens and the drive to the other store for the $43 extra and the kitchen table conversation after Marcus went to bed. She cried with the specific completeness of someone who has been strong for a very long time and who has arrived at the one moment that gives her permission to stop. The room stood, not all at once. In the same unorchestrated way the students had stood with their signs. One person, then two. Then a ripple that moved through the audience until 200 people were on their feet in a community center in suburban Connecticut on a Monday evening in May, while a 17-year-old girl in a navy dress read from crumpled pages at a podium. Aaliyah kept reading. She finished her speech. She folded the pages back along their creases and placed them in the pocket of the dress. Dorsey stood at the back of the room in civilian clothes without his badge, without his notebook, watching a girl read from the pages his search had scattered. He did not leave. The retail incident log Dorsey had created was formally suspended from the regional network that same evening following a call from the city attorney's office to the store's legal team. The formal expungement was completed within 4 business days. Aaliyah's name did not remain in the database as a flag. The 9 prior complaints were transferred to the main internal affairs intake system and formally reopened. 3 of the complainants were contacted by city investigators within the following week. 2 retained attorneys and filed civil suits. The 3rd had moved out of state but provided a written statement. Riley was placed under departmental review for complaint misclassification. The off-duty employment program was suspended across all retail contracts in the city, pending a structural audit of the oversight process. Dorsey was placed on extended administrative leave. Janet Cole was formally reprimanded for initiating a loss prevention call without specific articulable evidence of theft. The 47 seconds of footage from the woman with the phone combined with Greg's 31 minutes of camera footage became the evidentiary foundation for 3 of the 5 formal complaints subsequently filed against Dorsey. The footage was also, as Dana Reyes noted in her follow-up reporting, the reason this outcome was different from the outcomes of the previous 9 complaints. Not because the facts were different, because the facts were this time visible to everyone simultaneously and could not be rerouted to a secondary database and resolved by letter. Aaliyah gave one interview in the week following the ceremony. She chose Dana Reyes because Dana had asked her before raising the camera and had respected the answer she gave. The interview focused not on her individual achievement, but on the pattern of retail profiling faced by black teenagers and the specific burden of being required to produce extraordinary credentials in order to be treated with ordinary dignity. She said no acceptance letter should be the price of being respected in a store. The students who cannot produce one deserve the same treatment I do. The answer is not to tell black teenagers to be more impressive. The answer is to change the assumption. She said something else in the interview that Dana included in her written follow-up piece. I was not angry about being searched. I was angry about the logic that made the search feel justified to him. Because if my Harvard letter had not been in that bag, the logic would not have changed. The outcome for me would have been different. The search would have been the same. And there are thousands of students who walk into stores every Saturday without Harvard letters in their bags, and they deserve not to be searched just as much as I do. I was not special in that moment. I was just the one with the right document in the right bag on the right day. That is not justice. That is luck. The scholarship fund was named after considerable negotiation the Fairview First Generation Scholarship, not the Aaliyah Grant Scholarship. That had been the store's first suggestion. Aaliyah had declined because she did not want her name on a fund that had originated from an institution's guilt. The money was real, and the structure was right, and that was sufficient. 15 students applied in the first year. 3 received awards. On the last Saturday in August, Aaliyah and her mother drove to Cambridge, Massachusetts in a car that smelled of coffee and the particular mixture of anxiety and excitement that does not have its own word but should. They carried boxes across the Harvard yard in the morning heat. A campus security officer saw them looking at a building directory near the gate and walked over an older man in a blue uniform and offered directions. He looked at the address on the box in Aaliyah's arms. He pointed toward the correct residential building. he said. "Welcome. You are going to love it here." He held the directory open for them and then continued on his route. Aaliyah watched him go. For 1 second, barely long enough to name a memory moved through her. The sound of debate metals against glass. The weight of the envelope in her hands. Her mother's voice steady at a kitchen table at 11 at night. Then the memory passed. She picked up a box. She walked through the gate. That evening, after her mother had driven back to Fairview and after Aaliyah had made her bed and arranged her desk and placed the AP Chemistry textbook on the shelf beside the AP Literature textbook, she opened the bottom drawer of the desk and placed the scholarship speech inside it. The original pages, still creased, still carrying the specific marks of having been handled and refolded and held up under ceremony lighting while 200 people stood. She closed the drawer. She sat down at the desk and looked out the window at the yard, which was golden in the late August light. 2 students throwing a frisbee. A group of 4 sitting on steps with their phones laughing. A woman walking a bicycle along the path with the comfortable ease of someone who knew exactly where she was going. She did not need anyone's disbelief to turn into proof in order to know she belonged there. She already knew. She had known it for quite a while. If this story moved you, please subscribe to our channel for more stories about dignity, accountability, and the young people who refuse to let the world's failures become their own.